Hello, everyone. I'm Efkan Nifty, the CEO of the Caspian Policy Center. Today, we are doing another episode of our Caspian Conversations at the Caspian Policy Center. We try to cover key policy questions regarding the region, including security, economics, and energy issues in the region. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Major General retired Michael Repass. He has over 33 years of experience in U.S. military, and also he has joined our security and politics program a few months ago, and we started working together on the key policy and security questions of the Caspian region, Greater Caspian region. Obviously, his immense experience is very helpful for us to understand and analyze the security situation in the Caspian region. There are a lot of concerning issues in the Caspian region in the security realm, but one of them is the nuclear security. And some of the countries in the region have been involved in with international organizations in addressing this challenge. Kazakhstan has been a champion in that regard, and I just wanted to have this conversation with General to see what the current situation is and what are the general issues that we need to highlight in the field of nuclear security in the Greater Caspian region. General, please.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Efkan, and I appreciate being part of the Caspian Policy Center and certainly the Caspian discussions. First, let me just talk about nuclear use historically in the Caspian region. It's really in two eras, if you will. The first era would be the pre-1991 era, which could be generally described as that would be the Soviet use of the terrain in the Caspian Basin for military purposes. Specifically, military testing, basing nuclear capabilities in the region, also production and fabrication of highly toxic and radiological materials. So in pre-1991 is really focused on the material or the military side. The post-1991 era, with the fall of the Soviet Union and the independence of the states, you really get into a transition period where they have this material and capabilities to include militarized nuclear capabilities. And what do they do with them? They need to be properly stored and properly disposed of. So you get into a transition phase. The United States and other countries were very concerned about this, particularly in Europe. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to ensure that there was a peaceful and reasonable transition of the nuclear capabilities into secure hands or demilitarized in accordance with international agreements. So you have a transition phase. After that, you get into a sustainment phase, I'll call it, where they continue to denuclearize and transition the highly enriched uranium to something that's usable in the civilian world, either for medical, industrial, or primarily for power. We recently saw in the past few days, an agreement between the United States and one of our regional partners, Kazakhstan, concerning highly enriched uranium, and where they have demilitarized it from the highly enriched state down to civilian purposes, and it is put into a regional bank or a bank that is accessible by Kazakhstan. And it'll be there for the long-term future for their use for civilian power primarily. So this is kind of where they've come from and where they've arrived to. A lot of these programs are run by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which we can talk about a little bit in detail later.
Thank you, General. And I think Kazakhstan have worked with the international community, obviously with the United States. What challenges do you see for other countries in the region, perhaps, not just Kazakhstan? And I think it is a perhaps larger issue than one specific country. I know that we have been discussing a lot about maritime security in the region. Obviously, nuclear security has its own importance. In that regard, how would we define the challenges that we are facing, and what are the opportunities in that regard?
Okay, outstanding. Yeah, so great question. First off, let me talk about the lowest probability and the highest severity scenario, where you have a loose nuclear material of some sort, highly enriched uranium, which we pretty much eliminated in the region, but an intensified radiation source. If that were to be loose in that it's not properly stored, not properly accounted for, and is available to either criminal organizations or terrorist organizations, that presents a very significant security risk to the region. So that's the greatest concern. It's the least probable, but it has the highest severity. Moving down this probability and severity curve, if you will, there's this business of unaccounted for material. In the post-Soviet era, we think everybody understands what is out there, but there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 kilograms of loose nuclear material that has never been accounted for. Some of it shows up occasionally in the South Caucasus, being smuggled and offered for sale on the black market, but that's been controlled by the various governments that were involved with that. Farther down the chain of less, I would say, severe problem sets, you get into the residuals from nuclear testing or chemical testing or something like that. And that really gets into the environmental degradation that comes along with nuclear fabrication. So there's substantial nuclear contamination in some areas of the Caspian Basin and elsewhere. That has to be mitigated and has been the subject of ongoing efforts multilaterally and bilaterally between the U.S. and the member nations. We're talking about the proper storage of highly enriched uranium that has now been deprocessed or reprocessed into less enriched uranium, low enriched uranium. And there's a tremendous public health concern about that as well. Along with the residue from nuclear testing and storage, you also have the scrap metal and all that residue that goes with it. It has to be properly stored and disposed of. We don't want the scrap metal showing up in our cars or future metal devices that are for civilian use or household use. That would be a very bad situation to have irradiated metals in the economic zone, if you will. And finally, the criminal and terrorism business. Terrorism threats in that region are low indigenously or organically. However, terrorism from the Afghan and Pakistan region transiting through the area, we know that that's an ongoing problem as part of the human smuggling networks that exist in the region. So we're a little bit concerned about that, but it is not an overriding concern because, again, the nations have a very good border control and anti-smuggling programs. On the criminal side, the final concern is the likelihood is extremely low that anything would come up in the criminal side. But it's there. It could be a means of government coercion should they get their hands on nuclear material, create an expedient dirty bomb where this nuclear material is paired with an explosive device and is set off in a city. That would be a very bad outcome.
Obviously, in all of the security issue is something ongoing, and resilience is a key in that. Yes, we have some success in that regard in the region, but how do you see the future in that, in terms of the bilateral cooperation within the region itself, and also their work with the other agencies across the globe? This is an important point because sometimes particular success may people become more comfortable on that, and then it may lead some problems down the road. So in that regard, how do you evaluate that?
So in regards to the future and the potential for bilateral cooperation, as well as multilateral cooperation, there are several things that have been done and we should continue to do in the future and build upon. First one is the U.S. Congress passed the Nunn-Lugar Counterproliferation Reduction Act in 1991. That provided funding. It also pretty much provided the template for U.S. engagement to reduce nuclear materials and harmful items in the region. This led to the Proliferation Security Initiative, signed on by about half the nations of the world in 2003. But it provides support for reducing hazards across the board. That's nuclear, chemical, bio, lethal pathogens, etc. And in this age of COVID, lethal pathogens is probably a good avenue to have some proficiency in. But there are several competencies that the nations must have, and they need to build upon these, continue to build upon these and sustain them in the future. And I'm talking in terms of people, processes, and technology. there are four things, specifically prohibiting proliferation-related conduct. It's very important that they have the laws in place or the legal basis for prohibiting.
That's not enough.
Absolutely. They have to have the legal basis from which to move forward on. The second one is inspection and identification of the hazards themselves. They have to have proper customs, they have to have border controls, they have to have all the processes in there. And then they need to know what they're dealing with. The third thing is seizure and disposition capabilities. These are very dangerous materials and they need to know how to manage them, how to store them, how to transport them, etc. And that also gets us into security of established facilities to include nuclear power plants, nuclear material storage, either industrial, medical, or for power purposes. And finally, the fourth thing is rapid decision making. And that extends across borders as well. Because country A may have a problem. Communication is absolutely imperative. Reliable, secure, redundant, and resilient communications, particularly in a crisis. So those are the things looking forward that we ought to emphasize as things that can happen bilaterally and even multilaterally in the region.
Thank you, General. Today at the Caspian Conversations, we touched a very important issue in the security field in the Caspian region, which was nuclear security. Obviously, as you mentioned, on the bilateral cooperation is very important, and multilateral cooperation is important. We need to continue the programs that we have started and perhaps build on them as well. And I think this is a process that we should be resilient about, and also following up with the success that we made previously. So I look forward to our future conversations on different aspects of the security in the Caspian region. Once again, General, thank you for joining me today, and I hope to follow up in the future as well.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you.